You can't even imagine what it's like to watch your own granddaughter open a gift from the neighbors you've trusted for decades and see her freeze, her face draining of color as she whispers, "What is this?" I promise you, nothing in my 70 years prepared me for that moment. If you think you know your neighbors, think again. Because what happened next turned my world upside down, and I still don't know if I'll ever look at our street the same way again. Before I tell you what was inside that box, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever had a moment where your trust was shattered by someone you thought you knew, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your own story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that makes you grateful to be alive. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and my granddaughter Ellie was visiting for the weekend. She's 9, with a laugh that could melt the iciest heart. We were in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. I figured it was a package or maybe a neighbor dropping off some mail by mistake. But when I opened the door, there was a box on the porch. No note, no card, just a plain brown box with Ellie's name written in thick black marker. I looked up and saw the Millers, our neighbors for over 30 years, standing at their window, watching us. Their faces were blank, unreadable. I felt a chill, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just my imagination. Ellie was excited, of course. "Can I open it, Grandpa?" she asked, her eyes wide. I hesitated. Something about the box felt off, but I didn't want to ruin her excitement. I told her to wait until after breakfast. But the whole time, I couldn't stop glancing at that box on the counter. It was too heavy for a toy, too light for books. I kept thinking, why would the Millers send Ellie a gift? They'd never shown much interest in her before. In fact, last Christmas, they barely said hello. After breakfast, Ellie tore into the box. The moment she lifted the lid, she froze. I've never seen a child's face change so quickly, from joy to confusion, then to something like fear. She reached in and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Her hands were shaking. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took the pouch from her and felt something cold and hard inside. My heart was pounding. I looked at Ellie, then at the window. The Millers were still watching. I opened the pouch and poured the contents onto the table. Out tumbled a silver locket, old and tarnished, with a strange symbol etched on the front. I'd never seen anything like it. Ellie stared at it, her eyes wide. "Grandpa, I don't like it," she said, her voice trembling. I tried to reassure her, but inside I was rattled. Why would our neighbors send something like this to a child? And why now? I started to ask myself questions I couldn't answer. Was this some kind of joke? A warning? Or something worse? I thought about the Millers' odd behavior lately, the way they'd stopped talking to us, the way their lights stayed on late into the night, the strange visitors coming and going. I remembered the argument I'd overheard last week, muffled through the fence, words I couldn't quite make out, but that left me uneasy. I wanted to call the Millers, to ask them directly, but something stopped me. Instead, I decided to show the locket to my daughter when she came to pick up Ellie. Maybe she'd know what to do. But as the day went on, things only got stranger. Ellie wouldn't let the locket out of her sight, but she refused to wear it. She kept glancing at the window, as if she expected the Millers to appear at any moment. I tried to distract her, but she was jumpy, nervous, not her usual self. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. Did Ellie like her gift? it read. No name, no context. My hands shook as I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. I looked out the window again. The miller's curtains were drawn now, but I could see a shadow moving behind them. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. I started to wonder if I should call the police. But what would I say? That my neighbors sent my granddaughter a creepy locket, and now she's acting strange. It sounded ridiculous. But then I remembered something from a story I'd heard on this channel before, about a family who ignored the warning signs until it was too late. If you haven't seen that video, you should watch it after this one. Sometimes the smallest things are the biggest warnings. As evening fell, Ellie grew more anxious. She kept asking if we could lock all the doors and windows. She said she felt like someone was watching her. I tried to comfort her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I decided to look more closely at the locket. I turned it over in my hands, searching for a clue. That's when I noticed a tiny inscription on the back, almost invisible. It read, "For what was taken, something must be returned." My blood ran cold. What did that mean? What had been taken? And what did they expect to be returned? I thought about every interaction I'd ever had with the Millers, every favor, every argument, every secret. I realized I didn't know them at all. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept the locket locked in a drawer, but I could hear Ellie crying softly in her room. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew this was just the beginning. Do you want to know what happened next? Should I open the locket? Should I confront the Millers? Or should I call the police? Let me know in the comments what you would do. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Because what happened next will shock you even more. You think you know your neighbors. You think you know your own street. But that night, as I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the old oak outside my window, I realized how little I truly understood about the people living just a few steps away. I kept replaying the day in my mind, every detail sharper now, every glance from the Millers suddenly loaded with meaning. Why had they sent that locket? Why to Ellie? And what did that message mean? For what was taken, something must be returned. I tried to convince myself it was just a strange, misguided gift, maybe an old family heirloom they thought Ellie would like. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The Millers had never shown any interest in us, not really. We'd lived side by side for decades, but our conversations had always been surface level. Weather, lawns, the occasional borrowed cup of sugar, but now every memory felt like a puzzle piece I'd missed. The next morning, I found Ellie sitting at the kitchen table, the locket in front of her, untouched. Her eyes were red from crying. "Grandpa, I had a bad dream," she whispered. "Someone was calling my name from the window. I tried to wake up, but I couldn't move." I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to tell her it was just a nightmare, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the locket was at the center of it all. I decided to do some digging. I started with the Millers. I searched their names online, looking for anything unusual. At first, nothing. Just the usual, birth announcements, a few old photos from the neighborhood association. But then I found an article from 20 years ago, buried deep in the local paper's archives. It was about a missing child, the miller's daughter, Abigail. She would have been about Ellie's age now. The article said she disappeared one summer afternoon, never found. The case was still open, but the trail had gone cold. My heart pounded as I read. I'd never heard about this. The Millers never spoke of a daughter. I tried to remember if I'd ever seen a child in their yard, but my mind came up blank. Had they sent the locket because of Abigail? Was this some twisted way of reaching out, or was it something darker? I wanted to ask them, but I was afraid. Instead, I called my daughter, Susan, and told her everything. She listened in silence, then said, "Dad, don't let Ellie touch that locket again. I'm coming over." Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath. She'd always been the practical one, the one who didn't believe in superstitions or ghost stories. But even she sounded rattled. While I waited for Susan, I tried to distract Ellie. We played cards, watched cartoons, anything to keep her mind off the locket. But she kept glancing at the drawer where I'd hidden it, as if she could feel it calling to her. I caught her once, standing in the hallway, staring at the Miller's house through the curtains. "Do you think they're watching us?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer. When Susan arrived, she took one look at Ellie and hugged her tight. Then she turned to me. "Show me the locket." I handed it over, and she examined it carefully. "This symbol," she said, tracing the strange etching with her finger. "I've seen it before. It's not just decoration. I think it's a family crest, or maybe something older." She pulled out her phone and started searching. I watched her face change as she scrolled through images. "Dad, this is the same symbol from that old house on Maple Lane, the one that burned down years ago." I felt my stomach drop. The Maple Lane fire was a neighborhood legend. People said it was arson. Others whispered about curses and bad luck. The house had belonged to the Millers' relatives, I remembered now. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was terrifying. Susan wanted to call the police, but I hesitated. What would we say? That our neighbors sent us a locket with a creepy message, and now my granddaughter was having nightmares. It sounded crazy. But then Ellie started crying again, saying she didn't want to sleep in her room, that she kept hearing someone whisper her name. That was enough for Susan. She called the non-emergency line and explained the situation as calmly as she could. The officer who arrived was polite but skeptical. He examined the locket, took our statements, and promised to look into it. But I could tell he thought we were overreacting. As he left, he said, "It's probably just an old family keepsake. Try not to worry." But I couldn't help it. I felt like we were missing something important, something dangerous. That night, I locked every door and window. I kept the locket in my desk, zipped tight, and put it under my pillow. I barely slept, listening for any sound from outside. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. I froze, heart pounding. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There, standing in the shadows, was Mrs. Miller. She was holding something in her hands, rocking back and forth. I watched as she placed a small envelope on our doormat, then hurried back to her house, glancing over her shoulder the whole way. I waited until I was sure she was gone, then opened the door and grabbed the envelope. Inside was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "Please forgive us. We had no choice. Return what was taken, and it will end." No signature, no explanation, just those words. I felt a wave of fear and anger. What did they mean, no choice? What had we taken? I thought about Abigail, about the fire, about the locket. I realized this was bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Something had happened years ago, something the Millers believed we were connected to. But how? Why involve Ellie? I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what I might find. Instead, I decided to wait until morning. Maybe things would make more sense in the daylight. But as I lay in bed, clutching the locket, I knew nothing would ever be the same. If you've ever had a neighbor's secret spill into your own life, you know how quickly trust can turn to suspicion. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you confront the Millers or keep your distance? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our last story about the family inheritance that tore a community apart, check it out after this video. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. You ever have a night where you can't tell if you're awake or dreaming? That's how it felt as I lay in bed, the locket clutched in my hand, Mrs. Miller's note echoing in my mind. Return what was taken, and it will end. I kept asking myself, what did we take? What did they lose? And why did it have to involve Ellie? The next morning, I found Susan already up, pacing the kitchen. She'd barely slept either. Ellie was quiet, her eyes shadowed, her usual spark gone. I tried to act normal, making her favorite breakfast, but she just picked at her food. Every so often, she'd glance at the window, as if expecting to see someone watching. I knew we couldn't go on like this. I decided it was time to talk to the Millers face to face. I left Susan with Ellie and walked next door, my heart pounding. I knocked, and after a long pause, Mr. Miller opened the door. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn and tired. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. I held up the locket. "Why did you send this to Ellie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "And what does this message mean?" I handed him the note. He stared at it for a long moment, then motioned for me to come inside. Our living room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Mrs. Miller sat on the sofa, hands folded in her lap, eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression haunted. "We never wanted to involve your family," she whispered, "but we didn't know what else to do." I sat down, clutching the locket in my hand. "Please," I said, "just tell me what's going on." Mr. Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. "It started years ago, after the fire on Maple Lane. Our daughter Abigail disappeared that same summer. The police never found her. But a few weeks after she vanished, we started getting these messages, notes left on our doorstep, always the same words. For what was taken, something must be returned. At first, we thought it was a cruel prank, but then things started happening. Strange things. Our pets disappeared. Our car was vandalized. We heard footsteps outside at night. We were terrified." Mrs. Miller's voice trembled. "We tried to move on, but every year on the anniversary of Abigail's disappearance, we'd get another note. And then, last week, we found this locket on our porch. No explanation, just the locket and a note with Ellie's name on it. We don't know who left it or why, but we thought maybe if we gave it to her, the messages would stop." I stared at them, stunned. "You thought giving my granddaughter a cursed locket would solve your problems?" Mrs. Miller burst into tears. "We're so sorry. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do." I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of pity. They were just as scared as we were, trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. But that didn't make what they'd done right. I stood up, clutching the locket. "If you get another note, you call me, and you call the police. No more secrets." As I left their house, I felt more confused than ever. The locket was still a mystery, but now it felt like a ticking time bomb. I decided to take it to an antique dealer in town, hoping they could tell me more about it. Maybe there was a logical explanation, something that would make all of this make sense. The dealer, a woman named Mrs. Green, examined the locket under a magnifying glass. "This is very old," she said, turning it over in her hands. "Late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. The symbol is a variation of a protection rune, often used in families who believed in warding off evil or misfortune. But this inscription, I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like a warning." I asked her if she thought it was dangerous. She hesitated. "Objects like this carry history. Sometimes that history is heavy. If I were you, I'd keep it somewhere safe, and I wouldn't let a child wear it." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a message, a threat, maybe even a curse. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. When I got back, Susan was waiting for me. "Did you find anything out?" she asked. I told her everything, the miller's story, the antique dealer's warning. She listened in silence, then said, "We need to get rid of it. Throw it away, bury it, something." But Ellie overheard us. She ran into the room, tears streaming down her face. "Don't get rid of it," she cried. "If you do, something bad will happen. I know it." She clung to my arm, shaking. I tried to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. That night, the nightmares got worse. Ellie woke up screaming, saying she saw a girl in her room, calling her name. She described Abigail, down to the dress she was wearing in the old newspaper photo I'd found. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Was it possible? Was Abigail trying to reach us through the locket? I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room, the locket on the table in front of me, watching the shadows move across the walls. I kept thinking about the Millers, about the fire, about the missing girl. I realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If you've ever had a family secret come back to haunt you, you know how it feels to be trapped between the past and the present. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you keep the locket or try to destroy it? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the neighbor who tried to steal an inheritance, watch it next. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. You ever have a moment where you realize you're in the middle of something much bigger than you ever imagined? That's where I found myself, sitting in my own living room, clutching a locket that felt heavier with every passing hour. I kept thinking about the Millers, about Abigail, about the fire on Maple Lane. I wondered how many secrets could be buried in one neighborhood before they started clawing their way back to the surface. The next day, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I called my old friend George, who's lived on this street even longer than I have. If anyone knew the real story behind the Millers and that fire, it would be him. When he arrived, he took one look at the locket and his face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. I told him everything, about the box, the note, the nightmares, the Miller's confession. George listened, his hands trembling. "I remember that summer," he said quietly. "Abigail was a sweet girl, always playing in the yard. But after the fire, everything changed. The Millers stopped talking to everyone. There were rumors. People said the fire wasn't an accident. Some even said it was meant for someone else. I pressed him for details, but he shook his head. People were scared. Nobody wanted to get involved. But I remember one thing. After the fire, the Millers started getting those notes. I saw one once, blowing down the street. I picked it up and read it. Same words. For what was taken, something must be returned. I thought it was just a prank, but now... He trailed off, staring at the locket. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The past wasn't just haunting the Millers, it was reaching out for us too. I thanked George and walked him to the door, my mind spinning. I realized I needed to know more about the fire, about Abigail, about the history of this street. I spent the afternoon at the local library, digging through old newspapers and public records. What I found made my blood run cold. The fire on Maple Lane had started in the middle of the night. The official report said faulty wiring, but there were whispers of arson. The Miller's house wasn't the only one targeted. There had been another family, the Harrisons, who lived right next door. Their house was spared, but they moved away soon after, never to be heard from again. And then, a week later, Abigail vanished. I found a photo of the Harrisons' daughter, taken at a school event. She looked just like Ellie. Same hair, same eyes. I felt a wave of nausea. Was it possible the locket was meant for the Harrisons, not the Millers? Had the wrong family been targeted all these years? I rushed home, my heart pounding. I called Susan and told her what I'd found. She listened in stunned silence. Dad, are you saying this is all some kind of mistake? That we're caught in the crossfire of someone else's revenge? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the locket, the notes, the nightmares, they were all connected. And now Ellie was at the center of it. That night, things reached a breaking point. Ellie woke up september, screaming, her voice echoing through the house. I ran to her room and found her sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. She was here, Grandpa, she sobbed. Abigail was here. She said I have to give it back, or she'll never leave. I held her tight, my own hands shaking. I realized I couldn't protect her from this, not with locks, not with reason, not with denial. I had to face whatever was haunting us, no matter how terrifying. I sat in the living room, the locket in my hand, and spoke out loud. Abigail, if you're here, tell me what you want. What needs to be returned? The room was silent, but I felt a chill in the air, a heaviness pressing down on me. I closed my eyes and waited. Suddenly, the locket snapped open in my hand. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded, almost invisible. It was Abigail, standing in front of the old Maple Lane house, holding a doll. I turned the photo over. On the back, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Find her, she knows." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Who was her? The Harrisons' daughter, George's wife, someone else? I realized the only way to end this was to find the truth, no matter how painful. If you've ever had to dig up the past to protect your family, you know how hard it is to face what you find. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you keep searching or try to bury the truth? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the family secret that destroyed a marriage, watch it next. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to face what's been hiding in the shadows all along. You ever feel like the past is chasing you no matter how fast you run? That's how it felt the next morning as I sat at the kitchen table, the locket and Abigail's faded photo in front of me. I kept turning the picture over, reading those words again and again. Find her, she knows. I couldn't shake them. a feeling that the answer was right in front of me, just out of reach. Susan came over early, her face drawn and anxious. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. I shook my head. "Ellie, she's still asleep, thank God, but I don't know how much more of this she can take." We sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Finally, I said what we were both thinking. "We have to find the Harrison's daughter. She's the only one who might know what really happened." I started making calls. It took hours, but finally I tracked her down a number for a woman named Rachel Harrison, living 2 towns over. My hands shook as I dialed. When she answered, her voice was cautious, almost guarded. I introduced myself, explained who I was, and told her about the locket, the notes, the nightmares. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I was wondering when someone would call." Rachel agreed to meet us at a coffee shop that afternoon. When we arrived, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked older than I expected, but her eyes were sharp, watchful. I slid the locket across the table. She stared at it for a long time, then looked up at me. "I haven't seen this since the night of the fire." She took a deep breath and began to talk. "That night, I woke up to smoke. My parents were already outside, screaming for me to get out. I grabbed my doll and ran. When I got to the street, I saw Abigail standing in the yard, crying. She was holding this locket. She said, 'It's not safe. You have to take it.' I didn't understand, but I took it from her. Then she ran back toward the house. I never saw her again." Rachel's voice broke. "After that, everything changed. My parents wouldn't talk about the fire. We moved away, but every year on the anniversary I'd get a note. Same words, 'For what was taken, something must be returned.' I thought it was a cruel joke. I tried to forget, but I never could." I felt a chill run through me. "Why did Abigail want you to take the locket?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't know, but I always felt like it was meant to protect me, or maybe to protect her. I kept it hidden for years, but then, one day it was gone. I thought I'd lost it. I never told anyone." Susan leaned forward. "Do you think Abigail's spirit is still here? That she's trying to tell us something?" Rachel hesitated. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I do know this. Until the truth comes out, none of us will have peace." We sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over us. I realized that the locket wasn't just a symbol of the past, it was a key to secrets that had been buried for too long. When we got home, Ellie was waiting for us, her eyes wide and frightened. "Did you find her?" she asked. I nodded. "We did, sweetheart, and we're going to make this right." That night, I sat with Ellie, holding her hand as she drifted off to sleep. I promised her that I would do whatever it took to protect her, to end this once and for all. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that sometimes the only way to break a curse is to face it head on. If you've ever had to confront the ghosts of your past, you know how hard it is to find the courage to keep going. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you keep digging or try to let sleeping secrets lie? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the neighbor who tried to rewrite history, watch it next. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set you free. You ever notice how the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it? That's what I kept thinking as I sat in the quiet of my living room. The locket and Abigail's photo on the table. Rachel's words echoing in my mind. I could feel the weight of generations pressing down on me, secrets, guilt, and the desperate hope for closure. The next morning, I called the Millers and asked them to come over. I wanted everyone in the same room. When they arrived, they looked nervous, as if they already knew what was coming. Susan sat beside me, her jaw set. Ellie clung to my arm, her eyes darting between the adults. Rachel arrived last, her face pale but determined. We sat in a circle, the locket in the center of the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. We're here because we all deserve answers. And because Ellie deserves peace. Rachel took a shaky breath. I need to tell you what happened the night of the fire. Abigail gave me this locket. She said it would keep me safe. I never understood why. But I think she knew something bad was coming. Mr. Miller's hands trembled. We never told anyone, but that night we got a phone call. A voice said, "You took what was ours. Now you'll pay the price." We thought it was a prank, but then the fire started, and Abigail, she was gone. Mrs. Miller wiped her eyes. We tried to move on, but the notes kept coming, every year. We thought if we gave the locket to Ellie, maybe it would end. We're so sorry. Rachel looked at them, her voice soft but steady. The locket was never meant to be a curse. It was meant to protect, but as long as the truth stays hidden, none of us will be free. I realized then that the only way forward was to bring everything into the light. I turned to the Millers. Did you ever find out who made that call, or why they targeted your family? Mr. Miller shook his head. We had our suspicions. There was bad blood between our family and the Harrisons, old arguments, property lines, jealousy, but nothing that should have led to this. Rachel nodded. My parents always said the Millers took something that belonged to us, but they never said what. After the fire, they refused to talk about it. We moved away, and I never saw Abigail again. The room was heavy with regret and unfinished business. I looked at Ellie, who was watching us with wide, solemn eyes. What do you want to do with the locket? I asked her gently. She hesitated, then whispered, I want to give it back. To Abigail. A hush fell over the room. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the hallway, a shadow, a whisper of a presence. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, Abigail was listening. We decided to return to the old Maple Lane lot, where the house had once stood. It was overgrown now, just a patch of wild grass and broken memories. We stood together, the locket in Ellie's hand, the air thick with anticipation. Rachel knelt beside Ellie. Say what you need to say, she whispered. Ellie closed her eyes, clutching the locket. Abigail, I'm sorry for what happened. I hope you find peace. I'm giving this back to you. She placed the locket on the ground, right where the front steps used to be. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sudden breeze swept through the lot, rustling the grass, swirling around us. The locket glinted in the sunlight, then settled, still and quiet. We stood in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I felt a sense of release, as if a weight had lifted from my shoulders. Rachel wiped away tears. The Millers held each other, their faces etched with relief and sorrow. On the way home, Ellie was quiet, but for the first time in days, she seemed lighter. That night, she slept soundly, no nightmares, no whispers. The house felt peaceful, as if the shadows had finally retreated. If you've ever had to let go of something painful to find peace, you know how hard it is to say goodbye. What would you have done in our place? Would you have faced the past or tried to forget? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the family feud that ended in forgiveness, watch it next. Sometimes the only way to heal is to return what was never truly yours. You know, sometimes the hardest part isn't facing the past. It's living with what you find. After we left the old Maple Lane lot, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. The secrets, the guilt, the pain that had been passed down from one family to another. All because no one wanted to talk about what really happened that night. I wondered how many other families were living with ghosts of their own. Afraid to speak the truth, the days that followed were strangely quiet. For the first time in weeks, Ellie slept through the night. No more nightmares, no more whispers. She started smiling again, playing in the yard, her laughter echoing through the house like sunlight after a storm. Susan and I watched her, both of us feeling a cautious relief. It was as if a shadow had finally lifted. Rachel called a few days later. She sounded lighter too, as if a burden she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for believing me. I never thought I'd get answers or that anyone would care enough to help." I told her she was always welcome here, that sometimes the only way to heal is to share the pain with someone who understands. The Millers kept to themselves after that. I saw them in their yard, tending to their flowers, moving a little slower, but with a new gentleness between them. One afternoon, Mrs. Miller brought over a plate of cookies. She didn't say much, just pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for helping us find peace." I could see the gratitude in her eyes and something else. Maybe forgiveness, maybe just the relief of finally letting go. But even as life returned to normal, I found myself changed. I started noticing things I'd ignored before, the way neighbors avoided certain topics, the way old wounds lingered just beneath the surface. I realized that every family has its secrets, its regrets, its moments, its of betrayal and forgiveness. And sometimes the only way to move forward is to face those moments head on, no matter how painful. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, I sat on the porch with Susan. We watched Ellie chase fireflies in the yard, her laughter ringing out in the warm summer air. "Do you think it's really over?" Susan asked quietly. I thought about it for a long moment. I think the worst of it is behind us, but I also think we'll always carry a piece of this with us. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's a reminder to hold each other close, to talk about the hard things, to never let secrets fester. Susan nodded, her eyes shining in the fading light. "I'm proud of you, Dad. You didn't give up, even when it got scary." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. We did it together. That's what family is for. If you've ever had to fight for your family, to protect them from the shadows of the past, you know how exhausting it can be. But you also know how powerful it is to come out the other side, stronger and closer than before. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have risked everything for the truth or tried to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the neighbor who found redemption after years of silence, watch it next. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the courage to face the truth. Together. You might think a story like this ends with a single act of closure. But the truth is, healing is a journey, one that keeps unfolding long after the last secret is revealed. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd been through. The fear, the confusion, the anger at our neighbors, and the pain of seeing Ellie so afraid. But also the moments of courage, the unexpected kindness, and the way our family came together when it mattered most. One afternoon, as I was tending the garden, Ellie came running up to me, her face bright and open. "Grandpa, do you think Abigail is happy now?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. I knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think she's at peace, sweetheart. And I think she's grateful that you helped her find her way home." Ellie smiled, and for the first time, I saw no trace of fear in her eyes, only the innocence and resilience that children seem to carry even after the darkest storms. Susan and I talked often about what we'd learned. We realized that sometimes the things we fear most are the things we need to face together. That secrets, no matter how old, have a way of shaping our lives until we bring them into the light. And that forgiveness of others and of ourselves is the only way to truly move forward. Rachel visited us once more before moving away for good. She brought a small bouquet of wildflowers and a letter she'd written to Abigail, which she asked us to leave at the old Maple Lane lot. "I need to say goodbye," she said, her voice trembling but strong. We walked there together, the three of us, and placed the letter among the tall grass where the locket had lain. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink, and for a moment the world felt still, like a wound finally beginning to heal. The Millers, too, seemed changed. They started joining neighborhood gatherings again, no longer hiding behind closed curtains. Mrs. Miller even organized a small block party, inviting everyone on the street. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building something new, something honest and maybe even hopeful. As for me, I found myself more grateful than ever for the simple things: a quiet morning, a child's laughter, the comfort of family around the dinner table. I realized that the real gift wasn't the locket, or even the answers we found, but the strength we discovered in each other. The courage to ask hard questions, to listen, to forgive, and to love, despite everything. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. Maybe you've faced your own family secrets, or maybe you're still searching for answers. Whatever your story, know that you're not alone. There's always hope, even in the darkest moments. And sometimes, the greatest healing comes not from solving every mystery, but from choosing to move forward, together. So, what would you do if a secret from the past landed on your doorstep? Would you open the box, or leave it closed? Would you confront your fears, or let them linger in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the light someone else needs. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check out our other videos, especially the one about the family who found forgiveness after decades of silence. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through, and the ones we choose to tell. Thank you for listening. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, the truth may be heavy, but it's never too late to set it down.